Welcome into the UFC Pick Show for Vegas 6. UFC Vegas 6 Saturday night, 6 p.m. Pacific main card, 3 p.m. Pacific prelims going off. Derrick Lewis versus Aleksei Oleinik as the main event. We got Matthew Holt, expert UFC handicapper from US Integrity. Matty, welcome in, buddy. How you doing?
Drew, how's it going? We had a little bit of a break last week with that misadventurous card they tried to put together with literally 10 fights being changed or canceled. But here we go. We have a great card this week, followed up by the pay-per-view next weekend.
Yeah, UFC numbered event next weekend, the heavyweight match. So we'll have to get back at that one for sure. But we do have a good card this weekend, man. I'm excited for this one. We got, the main event. Let's not bury the lead here, buddy. We got the last fight on the card, the main event. Aleksei Oleinik versus Derrick Lewis. We're seeing Derrick Lewis anywhere from minus 180 favorite to minus as high as 200 right now. 1.5 being the total. I find this as a very fascinating fight, an interesting handicap in itself, Matty, but interested to hear your thoughts on the main event on Saturday night.
So I bet the over 1.5 rounds, and I'll tell you why. Derrick Lewis, as he started to have more success late in his career, and let's face it, he has been having more success. He's 5-2 his last 7 fights, which include wins over Francis Ngannou, the number 1 title, who's the number 1 challenger, who's going to get the next heavyweight title shot after Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic have their 3rd fight next weekend. Alexander Volkov, who we just saw in a main event about a month ago, Brigoy Ivanov, Yair Latifi, and his losses are to Daniel Cormier, the former heavyweight champion, and Junior Dos Santos. So, I mean, we're talking about a guy in Derrick Lewis who has really started to piece things together. He was known as a guy who could just punch. 18 of his 23 wins by knockout, and at one point, all of his wins were by knockout. And that was his path to victory. He either knocked you out or he gassed and probably lost the fight. But what we've seen is as he's trained and evolved more as a mixed martial artist, he's found other ways to win fights. And while he's still known as a big knockout artist, and the narrative around this fight is one of two things. Aleksei Oleinik is either going to take down and submit Derrick Lewis in the first round, or Derrick Lewis is going to land something big on Aleksei Oleinik and take him out in the first round. But what's really interesting about this fight is despite the fact that Derrick Lewis has fought some guys who are pretty darn dangerous on the ground, he's been submitted once. In 30 career fights, this guy who has no ground game supposedly has been submitted all of one single solitary time. That by Daniel Cormier, the former heavyweight champion and one of the greatest to ever lace him up inside the UFC. So I'm not sure that he's going to get submitted. This is a huge, strong guy who is hard to get in vulnerable positions and keep there because he's so strong and put together. And on the other side of it, that big, wild, swinging, kind of kamikaze power punching effort that we used to see hasn't been there. He had a very calm, maybe even boringly calm effort against Francis Ngannou. His 3 of his last 4 wins are by decision. For a guy known as doing nothing but power punching, 3 of his last 4 wins come by decision. My guess here is Aleksei Oleinik, who's dropped a lot of weight. I mean, looked great physically against Fabricio Verdum just 6 weeks ago, is probably going to come in, look for the takedown early. Derrick Lewis is going to do what Derrick Lewis did against Brigoy Ivanov and fend off those takedowns, try to keep this fight standing, and be very, pragmatic in when he throws punches and when he lands them. I do think that Oleinik is likely probably going to gas from trying to wrestle the big man and will probably get knocked out late in the 2nd or early in the 3rd round. But the fact that this one has to end early by either knockout or submission, I just don't think that's true. And I'm taking over 1.5 rounds minus 115.
Okay, over 1.5 rounds there, guys. That's the 7.5 minute mark of this one. And Matty, just a follow-up question here. And guys, we got 5 picks for Saturday night's card overall, both the main and prelims here. How much does the age factor come in here with endurance in cardio, in your opinion, with what Oleinik's 42 or 43 years old, and Derrick Lewis is getting up there as well. So if Derrick Lewis doesn't get the knockout, and Oleinik, on the other side with the submission, which those are some great stats, only been submitted 1 time. How much do you think cardio comes in towards the later rounds?
I will say this: when guys get tired and they're both tired, it's also hard to get finishes because it's hard to get somebody to be enough to the big shot or explosive enough to get that takedown and then get in a vulnerable position. It's if one guy really gasses out and the other doesn't, where you tend to see finishes. I think at his age, Aleksei Oleinik is more likely to fatigue and gas out in this fight for two reasons. Number one, he's going to try to wrestle a big, huge man. He's going to try to wrestle and take down a big, giant bear of a man, and that is so fatiguing. Just the process of trying to do that, of pick up and throw down a guy that weighs 265 pounds, that'll probably weigh 270 when they walk into the cage, and is unbelievably strong. So if anyone's going to fatigue in this fight, I actually think it's going to be Oleinik. And for as big as he is, and he doesn't actually, exactly walk around with a six-pack, Derrick Lewis, he showed great endurance in a lot of his fights. Look, he was losing the first two rounds easily against Marcin Tybura in a fight where the guy was on top of him for 2 rounds, rallied late, got a third round stoppage, was getting dominated for 2 rounds against Alexander Volkov. Volkov gassed. Lewis stopped him late, literally with like 15 seconds less in the fight. Lewis looks like a plodding fighter, but his cardio has been great throughout his UFC career. I actually think cardio won't be an issue for Lewis. And his new patient style, again, a guy who they say has one path to victory, knockout, 3 of his last 4 wins come by decision. He's found success going the distance, using his range, using the threat of that big power to land steady jabs, leg kicks. And look, Oleinik's going to be no threat on the feet. So I wouldn't be surprised if Lewis's whole game plan is keep him off me early, make sure I don't get stuck on the ground in a bad position while we're still dry. And then when he gasses out, put it on him.
Matty, I like it. I'm tailing, man. We got over 1.5, minus 115 seems to be almost market wide right now, guys. So, the over 1.5 in the main event. We also breaking down the co-main event here. We got Akhmedov versus Chris Weidman here. Chris Weidman up to about a minus 140 favorite. You can get him as low as minus 130 now and as high as about minus 148, and 2.5 being the total here, Matty.
What an interesting fight this is you have 2 guys that historically are in 2 different classes. I mean, Chris Weidman at one point was the best top pound-for-pound fighter in the world after back-to-back wins over Anderson Silva when he was 14-0, undefeated, middleweight champion of the world, took over the reign from the greatest ever, and then, boy, did the wheels fall off the train for Chris Weidman. He's lost 5 of his last 6 fights, and all 5 of those losses were by knockout. And some of them he was faring well. He was faring well against Jacare. You could make a case that he was winning that fight throughout, got knocked out. That he was winning the fight against Yoel Romero, one big shot, knocked out. But what's interesting is in the last few fights, the Jacare shot was decent but not huge. It didn't look like Dominic Reyes hit him with any monster bomb. He just went down right away in 2 minutes. And his only win in his last 6 fights, Chris Weidman, was against Kelvin Gastelum in a fight where if you watch that fight, the first and only punch really that Kelvin Gastelum landed had Chris Weidman on all kinds of rubbery legs. At this point in Chris Weidman's career, I'm not sure a stiff breeze. We're glad there's no fans in there because I feel like if they cheered too loud, he would have gone down before he even walked inside the octagon. The only problem on the other side, and I could see why people are betting Weidman, is that Omari Akhmedov probably hasn't fought the same level of people. He hasn't been in there with all these beasts, and so you wonder if he can do it. And what's interesting is you have a guy in Chris Weidman who in his last fight tried to move up to 205 pounds, and it failed horribly. He got knocked out within inside of 2 minutes by Dominic Reyes. Now he's coming back down to his natural weight of middleweight. But he has lost 4 of his last 5 middleweight fights as well, and got knocked out in all 4. Akhmedov is on a 6-fight unbeaten streak all of a sudden and has looked pretty good in all of them. And he's a power puncher. Now, he spent a majority of his career at 170, but he has fought the last 4 times at middleweight and looked pretty good doing it. Look, I bet under 2.5 rounds here at a small plus. And the reason I took under 2.5 rounds is Chris Weidman has displayed no chin over the last 3 years. I mean, he just gets rocked every shot he takes, some of them not even big shots. And Omari Akhmedov, who tends to gas badly in a lot of his fights, comes out guns a-blazing in every fight. And I wanted to bet Akhmedov because the price is rising so much. I thought the line opened right where it probably should have been. Weidman a slight favorite, maybe minus 115. But as we start getting up to numbers I saw today, minus 135, minus 140, maybe even minus 145, now the value is starting to be on Omari Akhmedov. And it's very possible, and I wanted to make it clear, that if this line goes up to 150 or higher, I'll probably have a bet on Akhmedov before they get hit inside the octagon. But I do think either way, if Weidman gets him down, look, his last 6 fights didn't go the distance. His one win, he submitted Kelvin Gastelum. If this fight goes to the ground, there's a very good chance that Chris Weidman could submit Omari Akhmedov. But I don't know that Chris Weidman can take a punch anymore. Either way, it leads me to believe this one's not going the distance, and I get a little bit of plus at under 2.5. I'm definitely riding the under in this fight. Might have a bet on the underdog if the price keeps trickling up.
All right, liking the under there. And guys, you can get that as high as a plus 105 now. So some plus money on the under of 2.5 in the Weidman fight. We got a third fight up here. Maddie, Scott Holtzman up against Dariush, it looks like, minus 180, 2.5 being the total in this one.
Look, and here's sometimes is the trouble as we do break down these fights later in the week. The great thing is we got to see the weigh-ins. We got to make sure everybody's on point. That's great. But sometimes we miss numbers, and I feel like we might have missed some of the good numbers here with Beneil Dariush. I laid minus 155 earlier in the week, but I've seen it as high as, I don't know what you're seeing now, 185, 180s.
I'm seeing it as high as minus 190, Dariush.
Yeah, it's starting to climb really rapidly. This is a very favorable matchup for Beneil Dariush, who's really underrated. I'm surprised at how underrated Beneil Dariush. He's won 4 straight fights, 3 straight finishes against top guys like Drakkar Klose, True Dober, who's been red hot, got finished by Beneil Dariush, and his losses come against top guys. I mean, he lost to Edson Barbosa and Alexander Hernandez. On the other side, Holtzman's 36 years old. He has won 5 of his last 6, but he lost to Nick Lentz. That loss certainly hasn't aged well. He only has 5 knockouts in his 14 career wins. The way to beat Beneil Dariush is through power punching. The people that have beat him by knockout. Edson Barbosa, a huge power striker, beat him. Alexander Hernandez was able to knock him out. You can't out-grapple him. There's no way that Scott Holtzman can grapple with Beneil Dariush, especially not at 36 years old. And he's probably not going to knock him out, and he's probably not going to outwork him. Now, on the other side of things, what's interesting is Scott Holtzman's never been knocked out. He's never been finished in his career. All of his losses come by decision. And he's a pretty big guy for the weight class. If the price gets too high on Beneil Dariush, I already laid it. And I think if you can get under $2, it's still fine on Beneil Dariush. I think it's that much of a mismatch that the value is still there. But if it does get to $2 or higher and you're looking for an alternative way to bet this fight, you might be able to bet over 2.5 rounds in the minus 130, 35 range. And maybe that's a better way, because at the end of the day, I think Dariush by decision is by far, if they fought 100 times, I think Dariush wins by decision like 70 or 65 of those times. And then, he knocks him out sometimes. He probably So I think that's probably a pretty good bet too. But right now, I think Beneil Dariush is the one chalk on the card that I think has some real value there.
Okay, so you want to go on record here. It looks like low watermark is minus 179 right now. So yeah. Okay, laying the wood there with Dariush. We can get it as low as minus 179. Again, we have over 24 hours here until the first prelims go. And guys, we do have 2 prelims we're breaking down. We got Andrew Sanchez versus Wellington Turman here, Maddie. We got minus 145 Turman. Looks like 2.5 being the total in this prelim.
Yeah, I couldn't believe the opening number on this fight. And obviously some of the other sharps took advantage of that early number 2, and the early action's been on the underdog Sanchez. But I really like Andrew Sanchez here. This is a guy who the UFC had really high hopes for Sanchez, and he's still only 32 years old. But look at his losses. Melvin Vettori, who's a top 5 middleweight, Anthony Lionheart Smith, who has just fought for the title at 205 pounds, was in a main event against Glover Teixeira. So his losses are against some of the best guys in the division, and he has wins over Khalil Roundtree, who's a super athletic, freaky middleweight / light heavyweight, Trevor Hutzah Smith, Marcus Perez, and these two both have wins over Marcus Perez. Sanchez is much more dominating. So, and I think, look, the way to beat Sanchez, again, similar to Beneil Dariush, he's had trouble with power strikers like Anthony Smith. Wellington Turman doesn't have that power striking ability. This is more of a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, grappler, likes to use his grappling to potentially set up some of his striking, but his striking's more like one at a time. I think Sanchez has the wrestling chops to certainly keep this one standing or avoid those ugly positions. And you have to remember, we're back in the 25-foot smaller octagon here at the Apex in Nevada. And I think that really favors Sanchez, who should be stronger on the feet, should be the power puncher here. And I think at plus 130, look, his level of competition is light years away what Turman has fought. And I think Andrew Sanchez at plus 130 certainly is maybe the best value on the card.
And Matty, he's as high as minus 155 right now. So what, plus 143 on the kickback. So yeah, Sanchez there as the underdog, getting pretty good plus price. We got one more here: Justin Jaynes versus Gavin Tucker on the prelims. Looks like Gavin Tucker as high as minus 130 favorite. Yes, that is Tucker minus 130 favorite, as that's the high watermark number. And we got 2.5 with some juice towards the over in this one, Matty.
Look, and we just talked about that 25-foot octagon a second ago and how important it is and how much it's helped power strikers and elite grapplers. And in this case, we get a guy, Tucker, who's a Canadian. And there's a couple of things I really like about Justin Jaynes here. Number one, he's younger, 4 years younger. He's 30 years old. He's facing a 34-year-old guy in Tucker. But Tucker has to come in from Canada. And normally you'd say, oh, what's the big deal of coming in from Canada to Vegas? Well, during COVID, that means he has to quarantine before he comes in, come in, pass test. And look, I've been on 8 flights during COVID, and I can tell you that all 8 of those flights, none of them were very comfortable. You don't get water on them. You don't get drink service. You know, there's a little bit of anxiety with the masks, and are you going to get COVID from people? There's anxiety in the airport. Having to make that long flight from Canada to Las Vegas is a disadvantage. Whereas on the other side, Justin Jaynes trains right here locally in Las Vegas at Extreme Couture. So we have a guy who didn't have to travel anywhere. He literally lives and trains in the city at one of the most elite MMA gyms that there is, Extreme Couture. So he trains with some of the best guys, and he's the power puncher here. 8 wins by knockout. I think 3 of his last he's won 5 straight, and his last 3 wins in a row have all been by knockout for Justin Jaynes. So again, in a situation where Tucker is probably not going to be able to move around as much and avoid the big shots, Justin Jaynes is the harder striker here. He's 1 inch taller. He's going to have a slight reach advantage. He's 4 years younger. He didn't have to travel, trains at an elite gym. I really like Justin Jaynes here with all that momentum coming in. I was actually surprised they made him an underdog. I know Gavin Tucker gets a little bit of respect because his record's 11-1. This is a guy who's 1-1 or 2-1 in the UFC. One of his wins against Sam Cilia, who's not even in the UFC anymore, went over to Bellator and couldn't win any fights there. So that win certainly didn't age well. And then one of his losses is to Rick Glenn, a former World Series of fighter guy who comes in. He's a decent fighter, but not great. And he was able to handle Tucker pretty well. And one of the things I noticed in that fight is Glenn was the bigger guy in comparison to Tucker. That's going to be the case for Jaynes here. Younger, bigger, stronger, didn't have to travel, trains at an elite gym here in town, and plus 120, consider me in.
That's a lot of main factors there. I like it. I like that one, Matty. So we got Justin Jaynes plus 120 on the prelims, Andrew Sanchez plus 145 in recap. We got Dariush minus 179, the favorite, laying chalk in that one. The Weidman fight under 2.5 plus 105. And in the main event, over 1.5 in Derrick Lewis versus Aleksei Oleinik there in the main event, like in the over 1.5. Matty, does that all sound correct to you? And anything else you want to shout out before we shut this down?
Sounds good to me. Let's make some money this week. Look, this is going to be a fun card. This isn't just like a fun fight they put together because it's two big guys in the main event. This is a meaningful fight. I mean, Derrick Lewis owns a win over the #1 contender, Francis Ngannou. It's very possible that with another win here for Lewis, that he's one win away from another title shot here in the UFC. So it's a very important fight. Chris Weidman, former middleweight champion of the world. This is a very important fight for him. And it kind of gets us all set up for what's going to happen next week with Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic, heavyweight title on the line, the trilogy. It's about time this fight happens, and I'm really excited.
Awesome stuff, Matty. That was fun, man. 5 fights for you guys. If you liked it, please give us the thumbs up, and we'll be back next week. So, Matty, best of luck. I'll be tailing, buddy. Hopefully we cash some tickets, man.
Let's get them. Best of luck to everybody. Thanks.